Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch, the show that keeps track on President Trump, especially in the context of the destructive measures that he is taking with respect to our liberty and our well-being. So I want to follow up on the Charlie Kirk murder, specifically the aspect in which President Trump and J.D. Vance and other Republicans and conservatives keep emphasizing this big philosophical divide between the left and the right. And they're castigating the radical left, and they're saying that the radical left and its big hate campaign is really the root cause of the murder of Charlie Kirk. This is pure nonsense, pure nonsense. Now, don't get me wrong. I have no doubts they believe it, just like the left believes it. And the right believes it. There's this huge philosophical divide between left and right, and they each accuse each other of hate, and that they're both saying that both sides are responsible for not just this murder, but much of the violence in America. Okay, now why do I say this is ridiculous? Well, keep in mind that I'm a libertarian, okay? Libertarians are not conservatives. We're not Republicans. We're not Democrats. We're not liberals. We are libertarians, which, of course, implies that we're different from these two groups of people. And so ever since I discovered libertarianism, and especially for the 35 years I've been here at the Future of Freedom Foundation, I've emphasized that there's really not any big difference between Democrats and Republicans, not in a principle sense. So when President Trump talks about this big philosophical divide and the radical left and creating hatred that generates this murder like Charlie Kirk, I look at it and say, that's ludicrous. I mean, if you look at the positions that Charlie Kirk takes as a conservative, and there's no question but that he's a standard conservative. Okay, now there's some libertarians that are no doubt saying, oh, well, he's got libertarian proclivities, and this is what they always do, because conservatives are generally good on economics. So they'll cite Charlie Kirk quoting Ludwig von Mises or Milton Friedman and say, oh my gosh, he's a libertarian, he's a libertarian. They do this with other Republicans as well. It's kind of humorous. But that isn't what makes a libertarian, just because somebody has read Austrian economics or believes in free market theory or likes Milton Friedman and so forth. There's a lot more to libertarianism than that. Those of you that are familiar with my work over the past several decades, and just in the past few segments here of Trump Watch, know that I focus in on what's the real fundamental roots of the maladies that are facing our society, including not just the Kirk killing, but other killings as well. I mean, like that woman that was on the train that recently got attacked and murdered. That didn't have anything to do with the big political divide in America, or that guy that killed those children in Minneapolis. That those children weren't expounding, political doctrines. And then you've got all these other rash killings. You've got the massive drug addiction in this country, and sufficiently large that the U.S. government has to continue this massive liberty-destroying war on drugs that they've been waging for decades and decades. And now, with President Trump killing people in the Caribbean, all that says is, wow, America has a huge drug addiction problem. And no, it's not because foreigners are coming in here and forcing cocaine up Americans' noses. It's because they want to take these mind-altering substances. And of course, nobody asks, why is such an enormous percentage of the population enough to justify this ridiculously destructive war on drugs? Why are they doing that? That's the real fundamental question. If this is such a great society, a free society, a just society, why are people tripping out on mind-altering substances? And then you've got the soaring suicide rates among young people, suicide rates among veterans, who supposedly protected our rights and our freedoms in Afghanistan and Iraq and Vietnam and so forth. So, I've been arguing for quite some time now that this is a sick society. And the reason it's a sick society is because you've got systems in place that have destroyed America's freedom. And even worse, people have been convinced since the first grade in the public government schools that their parents were forced to send them to, that this is freedom. I mean, if you did a survey of the American people right now, saying, do you live in a free society? I have no doubts that the vast majority would say, of course it is. I mean, and then they would start breaking out into song. A lot of the conservatives would, thank God I'm an American because at least I know I'm free. And they're convinced that they're free. Well, when you're convinced of something that isn't real, in other words, you're denying reality, there's your psychosis right there. Any psychiatrist will tell you that when you deny reality, it produces psychosis. And that's a large part of the problem we face in this country is that people are convinced of a false reality that they live in a free society. And if you bring this up, they get very mad. I remember giving a lecture on this subject once, and boy, somebody in the audience just took offense. Are you saying that I've been indoctrinated? He asked, and I said, yeah. And he was just flabbergasted. But I was a victim of this indoctrination too, and I had no doubts I lived in a free society. I remember a friend of mine in my late 20s recommended a book called A Time for Truth by William Simon, who I think he was Treasury Secretary under Reagan. And I read the book, and he was talking about freedom there. Okay, Simon was a conservative, and I thought, this is kind of ridiculous. And so I gave the book back to my friend after I'd finished, and I said, this is an interesting book, but what's all this nonsense about freedom? We're trying to get a free society. We live in a free society. That was how powerful the indoctrination had been on me. And I had no concept that I didn't live in a free society. And then I discovered libertarianism a couple years later through a hardcore, principled collection of essays in 4 little books that just broke through, just cracked this inches thick layer of indoctrination that had encased my mind. And I remember it was a road to Damascus experience. I realized, my gosh, this is phenomenal. I've been lied to all this time, but I'm now breaking free of the indoctrination. I realize we don't live in a free society because of these systems that I'm talking about. And even that's liberating, I mean, even if you can't change the world, it's liberating that you're able to recognize the world for what it is. You're recognizing reality. And so I think this denial of reality is part of the big problem we face in this country. It's one thing if people say, I realize that we don't live in a free society, but I like these systems that have destroyed our freedom, and I'm going to continue supporting them. I don't care. I don't want to be free. I want the systems. Okay, that's reality. But it's not reality when you say, oh, these systems have brought us freedom, when in fact they've done the exact opposite. They've destroyed freedom. Well, let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about here, because there's really no ideological divide between conservatives and liberals and Republicans and Democrats. And there's no difference in principle between what Charlie Kirk was expounding and what the average liberal or progressive expounds. Let me explain by giving you examples. Let's take education. All right, so Kirk is a conservative, endorses school vouchers. Okay, we've got to use vouchers to take kids out of the public schools and put them into private schools because public schools are doing a lot of damage and so forth. And then the liberal would say, no, we can't have vouchers. We need to just concentrate on improving the public school system. We can make it work. Kirk would respond and say, no, that you need vouchers and choice and competition to improve the public school system. This is a necessary reform. So you can see that, there'd be a lot of heat generated in this kind of debate. The man getting mad and angry over, vouchers. Should we adopt them or not or whatever? Well, really, it's boring to me. I mean, the whole debate's boring. Because notice there's no different in principle with their positions. Now, why do I say that? Because they both believe in the public schooling system. The system that says the state should be controlling, running education, supervising education. They have different reforms, different ways to make it work. Nonetheless, they believe in the overall system of government schooling. So I don't see that as this big intellectual philosophical divide. I put them on the same page, and their arguments are over reform. How should the system be reformed? Well, okay, it's possible that somebody gets so angry that they're going to be going out and killing somebody on that basis, but that goes back to what I've been developing as a thesis for many years now, that you've got these off-kilter people in American society that can't control themselves in these kind of reform-oriented debates, and so they go out and initiate violence or force in some warped or perverted way. And something clearly triggered this guy, the one that shot Kirk, but I'll get to that in a moment, but I don't think it had anything to do with school vouchers, you see, or any other of these political differences. In fact, of course, we still don't know because the guy really hasn't come out and expressed everything that was going through his mind, but they certainly have not found any big manifesto. Remember, like the Unabomber had a big manifesto of what his beliefs were. This guy, if he was a big radical leftist, as Trump says and Vance says, and that you'd think there would be this big leftist manifesto that he wanted to expound about, how great leftism is or whatever. Nothing like that. In fact, the only indication is that he started planning this a week ago or a week before the assassination. And there's just no indication of any radical leftist philosophy involved here. Now, let's take another one, Social Security and Medicare, the two crown jewels of American socialism. Well, okay, so what's Kirk's position on Social Security? It's the standard conservative position, reform it, raise the retirement age or privatize it, let young people opt out, which really isn't an opt-out because then he says, well, we have to continue it for people that are already on it, which means you got to tax young people to get the money because that's where government gets its money is by taxing people. So by opting out, all they're saying is we won't claim Social Security in the future, but we'll have to keep paying Social Security taxes until we reach 60 or whatever. Well, that's ridiculous. But again, it's all reform. And the Democrats get all heated and upset. No, we got to save Social Security. Man, otherwise there's people dying in the streets. But nobody in the conservative or progressive movement, liberal movement, calls for a repeal of Social Security. Just get rid of it. That's what I say as a libertarian. This is socialism. And see, that's the other thing. It's very destructive. It's done horrific damage to Americans' family values, children taking care of parents and when they need help and so forth. Terrible damage. And there's no care or compassion in this system. There's no care or compassion when it comes to the IRS or some welfare state bureaucracy. So when the left says, oh yeah, this reflects care and compassion, it's pure nonsense. It doesn't reflect any such thing. It's just a welfare program, okay, administered by the state. But they both believe in it, both conservatives and liberals. So there's no big philosophical divide on the overall system. Their fight is how to reform it, how to fix it, how to make it work. Kirk would argue, oh, well, we got to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse from Social Security. Same thing Musk does. Standard conservative stuff we've heard for decades. Waste, fraud, and abuse. The same with Medicare. Kirk would never call for the repeal of Medicare. Oh, yeah, he'd bash Obamacare. Okay, the Affordable Care Act. And that's what conservatives do. They bash Obamacare. But what they forget is that there was a big healthcare crisis before Obamacare. What do you do about that crisis? They have no answer. Because the crisis is rooted in Medicare. That's what destroyed, and Medicaid, destroyed what had been the finest healthcare system in history. And it's a cancer. What do you do with cancer? Well, if you can, you excise it. You don't reform it. You don't polish it. You don't reduce it. You cut it out and get it out of there. But they're not going to do that. So the fight is over, how are we going to save Social Security? And how are we going to do this? Oh, you hate the poor. You hate the needy. You hate the elderly. whenever you talk about dismantling the welfare state. So that's their big argument. That's when President Trump says, oh, there's a big philosophical divide and Vance reinforces it. What they're arguing over is the divide is over how to run the welfare state. Okay? Boring. Puts me to sleep. All right, there. Immigration, another example. Okay? So you got all this heated fights. The liberals say, oh, it's terrible. These raids are terrible. And by golly, Trump sending troops into American cities. And of course, they're right. I mean, it's all part of the immigration police state. The Berlin Wall down there on the border. But they all believe in the system. Liberals believe in the system of immigration controls. When you bring up the concept of open borders, and I mean real open borders, where there's like the border between Maryland and Virginia. There are no controls. That's real open borders. That's what I call for. That's the subject of my new book that, oh, by the way, which will be out shortly, I think in the next 2 weeks on Amazon, The Case for Open Borders, a primer. And it makes the case for just getting rid of all these restrictions. Well, liberals go apoplectic when they hear that. And, well, conservatives go double apoplectic. I mean, oh my gosh, open borders, the whole world would come here, Jacob, which one of the points I address in the book, a ridiculous point. But notice that they believe in the same system, so their fight is over how to manage this system, how to control it, how to make it work, which they've been doing for, decades now? I mean, Biden was in there. He was called a massive deporter-in-chief, even though they said the conservatives said he was open borders. They kept saying, Biden's open borders, open borders. Well, how can he be open borders when he's deporting massive numbers of people? And Obama was setting records too on immigration deportations. I mean, it's just a charade where they fight against each other, but it's like weird how they fight, because all they're fighting about is how their system should be managed. That's where all the heat is, and that's what Trump means when he says, oh, the radical left, and what Vance means was the radical left, that they want to manage the immigration control system, which is a socialist system, and they want to manage it different from how Republicans want to manage it. But meanwhile, the Republicans are carrying, Frederick Bastiat in their hip pocket, or Ludwig von Mises or whatever, and saying, we favor free markets, while they favor these massive government socialist programs like, public schooling and Social Security and immigration controls, which is based on the socialist principle of central planning. The drug war, okay? They all favor the drug war. Now, there's exceptions. You'll find liberals that say legalize drugs, and just like you'll find Republicans. I think William F. Buckley called for the legalization of marijuana. But by and large, conservatives love the war on drugs. They love the idea of government serving as people's daddy. We got to be people's daddy and put them in their room when they ingest bad substances, Jacob. This is what government's for. And Kirk was a big promoter of this. And then but the liberals believe in the same system. Now, they may not do the same things to enforce it. They may not be killing people like President Trump has ordered his military drug war goons to do in the Caribbean. But they believe in the same system, the drug war system. When you say, look, let's just legalize drugs, as we libertarians say, at least most of us libertarians, legalize it all. Why should government serve as anybody's daddy? Oh, man, the left goes apoplectic, the right goes apoplectic, but that's why when they talk about this big philosophical divide, all they're talking about is the fights over how to manage the inside of this box. I call it the status box. They're inside the box, and they're fighting over how to manage things in the box. And of course, no matter who gets in charge and manages it, it's an absolute catastrophe. I mean, I say that it's the box that's the cause of all the aberrant, not all, but most of the aberrant behavior in American society, including the rash killings. All right, the national security state. I guarantee you that Kirk never called for a dismantling of the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA, and a restoration of our founding governmental system of a limited government republic. Conservatives love the Pentagon. They love the NSA. They love the CIA. I mean, look at Trump. Even Trump doesn't doesn't even bash the deep state anymore. He's using the deep state to kill people in the Caribbean, to wage his beloved little war on drugs. And not only in Venezuela, it's ironic that he's going after Colombia now. Maybe he's never heard of Pablo Escobar. I mean, this is like weird because they spent I don't know how much time and money and effort trying to kill Escobar. And they kept saying, we can just kill Escobar. Big reward on his head and stuff. Man, everything's going to be hunky-dory. And they finally did. They killed the guy. And the drug war just kept going on bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And so this nonsense about, Maduro's involved in the drug war. Maduro's involved in the drug war. $50 million of taxpayer money for a reward. Okay, let's assume they assassinated him. Or jailed him like they did with Noriega. What good does it do? Not any good at all. They just keep it justifies their salaries of their federal judges and their federal prosecutors and DEA agents and the military now too. And it's ironic about the military because at the end of the Cold War, the military was panicked because they had no official enemy anymore. The Soviet Union had been their official enemy. And that was what they did to engender fear in the American people, because every national security state needs official enemies and fear. And so at that point, before they had Saddam Hussein in Iraq and so forth, Afghanistan, they said, well, we can fight the war on drugs. We can fight the war on drugs because people were talking about this peace dividend, which meant drastic reductions, not dismantling of the national security state, but drastic reductions in military intelligence spending. And so this is ironic because they got booted out of Afghanistan. They got out of Iraq, and they still got their war against Russia, but indirectly through a proxy. And so here they are doing what they were doing, suggesting they could do at the end of the Cold War, waging the drug war in the Caribbean and killing people in boats on the high seas with no due process of law. But they all believe in this, okay? The Democrats may be, objecting. Some Republicans are objecting that Trump's killing people without due process. But they all believe in the drug war, and so did Charlie Kirk. What else? Foreign interventionism. Kirk was a supporter of foreign. Now, he criticized it like Trump used to. Foreign interventionism here, foreign interventionism there, but mostly on practical grounds that, we let Afghanistan go on for too long, and, there's too much waste and abuse in the military, and, we should be more selective on where we intervene. Kirk was a big supporter of foreign aid to Israel, to the Israeli government. And so that's the thing, is that they all believe in foreign interventionism or foreign aid. They just want it in their way, both conservatives and liberals. But there's no principled objection, like with libertarian, to foreign interventionism in general. We say end all foreign intervention, end all foreign aid, including to the Israeli government. But that's why I just get bored with Democrats and Republicans. To me, it's a yawner. They put me to sleep with their big fights and debates and philosophical divides because they're inside the status box arguing with each other. What else? Tariffs and trade. Kirk was a big supporter of President Trump's tariffs and trade wars, and I presume sanctions and the embargo against Cuba. I mean, it just, on and on. But it's all statism. This is my point. This is why conservatives are such a disaster, because they'll preach freedom and free markets. They'll say, we're advancing freedom. And free markets, the free market lingo. But then they'll support tariffs and trade wars and sanctions and embargoes and immigration controls and all the things that violate economic liberty and free markets and the principles of Bastiat and Mises and Friedman and so forth. I guess it would be humorous if it wasn't so tragic. And then they pompously say, we've got this philosophical divide between us and the liberals that are all a bunch of socialists. Well, they're all socialists. It's just that the Democrats are actually more honest. They'll acknowledge they're socialists, like that guy running for mayor in New York. He doesn't make any bones about being a socialist. But if you look at his positions, in principle, they're really not much different from those of the Republicans. Republicans they'll criticize them for, minimum wage. But Republicans favor the minimum wage too. They never call for the repeal of it. They might oppose an increase in the minimum wage. And then on the overall regulated economy, Republicans are big supporters of the regulated economy administrative state that came into existence in the Franklin Roosevelt administration, along with the welfare state and the income tax and the IRS. When do you ever see these people, any of them, calling for abolishing the IRS and the income tax? Never, because that's what funds their whole system, the welfare states, warfare state system, drug war, foreign interventionism, foreign aid, and on and on. So those are just some examples of where there's really not a difference. So what's going on with this Kirk killing then? Is it really possible this guy got so upset? And what's really weird is that he grew up in a Republican family. Okay, so usually in Republican families, they're indoctrinating kids in Republican principles, which, like I say, are not really any different in principle from liberal principles. They're convinced they are, but they're not in reality. Not in the sense of what I'm talking about is breaking out of the box. You see, they're inside the status box. Libertarians are outside the box, saying, knock down the whole box, which causes both the left and the right to freak out. I mean, they have panic attacks over that possibility. So what's going on here? Well, they both accuse each other of hate. That's the popular buzzword, hate. And to a certain extent, there might be some truth in it, which I find very interesting because Kirk was one of these that spent a lot of time talking about gays and transgenders and speaking about them in a critical way. Conservatives generally do that, which is I've always found kind of interesting because, regardless of how a person feels about somebody changing their gender, transgenderism, it's their business. I mean, it's their life. Now, we're not talking about children. Set children is totally aside here. We're talking about adults. I mean, why not just leave people alone? Okay? They're not initiating force against anybody. They're not initiating fraud against anybody. But yet conservatives spend an awful lot of time criticizing how other people live their lives, like drug users. Nobody's going to say that drug abuse or drug usage is a healthy thing, but you can live your life by just leaving people alone. If that's what they choose to do, that's what they choose to do. Now, there might be cases for family interventions and so forth, but I'm talking about generally in life. You don't go around telling somebody how to live their lives because you become kind of obnoxious. And usually when people spend their lives trying to fix other people, it's because their own lives are such a mess. And so, I loved Leonard Reed's methodology. Always was improve yourself, work on yourself. But the conservatives spend a lot of time criticizing transgenders and not so much gays anymore, but they did 20 years ago. The things they said about transgenders, they were saying about gays. And one of the funniest things a conservative ever said to me was that he said that gays are doomed to be go extinct because they can't reproduce. And I thought, how ridiculous is that? I mean, there's been homosexuality since the days of antiquity. I mean, so why are they still here? Okay. So it was a ludicrous statement. But in any event, this guy who purportedly shot Kirk was apparently living, from what I read in the press, with a guy with whom he was romantically involved, a gay relationship, and the guy was changing his gender to woman. And so it appears to me that that's where this guy's anger, that something triggered in him, and my hunch is that it's the conservatives generally, not necessarily Kirk. I don't know what Kirk would say specifically when he talked about transgenders and gays, but generally there's a lot of conservatives that are just out there bashing. And in this guy's warped mind, I continue to believe he's not. I don't think he meets the legal definition of insanity, but he's one of these people that I call off kilter, that cannot control himself once he gets triggered. And I have no doubts that he considers that hatred, that spreading hate against transgenders and against gays and against the guy that he was romantically involved with, apparently. And if there's anything that set off his trigger, I would say it was that. And, we'll still have to find out, but I don't think it had anything to do with philosophical divide over school vouchers or Social Security or foreign interventionism. And he just got in his head that the Republicans, the conservatives, were spreading hate with respect to these two groups of people, gays and transgenders. And so he responds by killing Kirk, like that's really going to accomplish a lot. And so they say, well, he's motivated by hate. But they don't say hate of Kirk for his beliefs on transgender and gays. No, it's a hatred generally in the left movement of conservative values and stuff, because I don't think that they want to acknowledge the conservatives, including Trump and Vance, in my opinion, I don't think they want to acknowledge that this murder is rooted in this issue of transgenders and gays and so forth. Now, obviously, there's issues that arise in any society with problems like this, the bathroom issue and the sports issue and so forth. But I always put my faith in the free market to figure these things out and arrive at solutions. I mean, libertarianism doesn't provide perfection in American society or any society. It just provides a way for people to be free, and that when problems arise, which they inevitably do, a free people can figure out the best solutions to those. But my hunch is that Trump and Vance and other conservatives don't want to focus in on this murder as being something as mundane as somebody that got angry because somebody in his mind was criticizing the guy he was involved with. I think they want to use it as an excuse to expand the fight to something much bigger, like this guy was a Antifa member or advocate of Karl Marx and Communist Manifesto and all this. And there's no evidence for that at all. I mean, like I say, there is no manifesto, nothing like that. So, in conclusion, this is my hunch, and it may pan out totally different, that I think probably this guy got triggered because of what was going on with respect to conservatives' constant critique of people who are going into the transgenderism or have gay relationships and so forth. And doesn't have anything to do with some big philosophical, political divide. But to get at the root of all this is what I keep saying is that we've got to raise the debate to a much higher level. And that is, number one, are we free? Okay, that's the first question everybody's got to deal with. Number two, do you want to be free? Once you realize you're not free. A lot of people would say no, including libertarians. There's libertarians that have given up. They won't admit it. But they'll say, we're advancing freedom. But they never call for dismantling the national security state or Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid, public schooling, whatever. They want to reform it. They want to call that advancing freedom. Well, it's not advancing freedom. It's advancing socialism. But they want to call it advancing freedom. But they've essentially thrown in the towel and said, or immigration controls. We'll take the immigration police state, Jacob. That's more important to us. We want safety and security at the border, and so we're willing to give up the idea of economic liberty that comes with open borders, freedom of association and so forth, freedom of contract. Okay, it's a conscious decision, but it's not advancing freedom. It's giving up freedom for the sake of safety, security, whatever. Same with Social Security, public schooling, and the like. But if people want to be free, then we've got to make the case as to what are the systems that have destroyed our freedom, that are encasing us in serfdom, as Hayek called his book, The Road to Serfdom. And then how do we make the case for dismantling these systems so that what is left is a limited government republic along with a genuinely free society? And of course, that's what we do here at FFF. That's what we've done for 35 years with your great support, which brings me to my concluding thank you. Thank you very much for sticking with us for all these years, even though you may disagree with us on this issue or that issue or whatever. I think you know that we're here to present this principled case for the libertarian philosophy with the aim of achieving a genuinely free society for all of us to experience and enjoy. And that's Trump Watch for this week. Thank you all very much for tuning in, and thanks for your great support of FFF.